At 71, I was a millionaire. Then my only son died. At his funeral, Triplets approached me with a secret that changed everything. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering against the polished marble floor of the foyer, a sound that usually would have grated on my nerves, but now was just another muted thud in the sudden, echoing silence of my world. The voice on the other end, distant and clinical, had delivered the news, each word a hammer blow against the fragile edifice of my remaining life. Michael, my Michael, gone. 43. A car accident. The irony, a doctor, someone who saved lives, taken so swiftly, so senselessly, in a single, brutal instant. It was a cruelty that twisted my gut, a bitter, metallic taste rising in my throat. My son, my only son. The ache in my chest was a physical thing, a crushing weight that stole the breath from my lungs and the light from my eyes. What was left? What was there to be left? I wandered through the sprawling rooms of this house, a mausoleum of memories, each piece of furniture, every framed photograph, a silent sentinel to a life that no longer held meaning. The Persian rugs, the antique armoires, the crystal chandeliers that once sparkled with the joyous echoes of Michael's laughter, now felt cold, alien, almost mocking in their opulent stillness. I traced the outline of a faded photograph on the mantelpiece, a younger Michael, perhaps 10 years old, grinning gap-toothed, a baseball cap askew, his arm flung around my shoulders. He had always been so full of life, so vibrant, a whirlwind of energy and curiosity. From the moment he was born, he had been the sun in my universe, the reason I breathed, the very purpose of my existence. We had built this life, this empire, together, though he would never admit it, always downplaying his own contributions, crediting my shrewd investments, my relentless drive. But it was for him, always for him. Every share bought, every property acquired, every painstaking negotiation, it was all to secure his future, to ensure he would never want for anything. And he had thrived, hadn't he? A brilliant doctor, respected, admired, doing so much good in the world. He was everything I had ever hoped for, and more. Now, the millions sitting in various accounts, in portfolios managed by eager young men in expensive suits, felt utterly meaningless. What good was wealth when there was no one to share it with, no one to leave it to, no one whose eyes would light up at the prospect of a new venture, a grand adventure? The vast sums, once a source of comfort and security, now mocked me with their emptiness. They were just numbers on a screen, devoid of joy, devoid of purpose. The silence of the house pressed in on me, a suffocating blanket. I used to hate silence. Always had music playing, or the television humming in the background, or the distant, comforting sounds of Michael moving about, his footsteps on the stairs, the gentle hum of his voice on the phone. Now, there was only the oppressive quiet, punctuated by the occasional creak of the old house settling, or the mournful sigh of the wind outside. It felt as if the very walls mourned with me, their grandeur crumbling under the weight of my grief. Every object, every nook and cranny, held a memory, a phantom presence that twisted the knife in my already bleeding heart. The worn armchair where he used to read, the piano where he'd haphazardly pick out tunes as a child, the kitchen where we'd shared countless meals, and even more countless conversations. Each one was a sharp, painful shard, tearing at the fabric of my composure. I was adrift in an ocean of sorrow, and the shore, once so clear and inviting, had vanished into an impenetrable fog of despair. The world outside, with its bustling life and indifferent sun, felt alien and distant, as if I had been cast out into a cold, dark void, forever severed from the warmth of human connection. The future, once a tapestry woven with threads of anticipation and plans, was now a blank, terrifying canvas, stretching endlessly before me, utterly devoid of color or hope. I was 71, and utterly, irrevocably alone. The funeral was a blur of hushed condolences and the scent of lilies, a heavy, cloying perfume that clung to my clothes and permeated my very soul. People I barely recognized, colleagues of Michael's, distant relatives, all offered their platitudes, their sympathetic nods, their outstretched hands. Each interaction was a fresh stab of agony, a reminder of the chasm that had opened in my life. I saw their genuine sorrow, their admiration for Michael, and yet, beneath the surface of their well-meaning words, a different kind of torment gnawed at me. Guilt. It coiled in my stomach, a venomous serpent, whispering insidious questions. Had Michael worked too much? Was that why he was so driven, so consumed by his profession? Was it because he was lonely, because he hadn't found someone to share his life with, a void he tried to fill with endless hours at the hospital, with the relentless pursuit of healing others? I replayed conversations in my head, a torturous reel of moments where I could have, should have, done more. Why hadn't I insisted he take a vacation, truly unplug, escape the demanding grind of his career? Why hadn't I pushed him harder to find a partner, to build a family of his own? I remembered countless dinners where he'd arrived late, exhausted, his eyes shadowed with fatigue, talking about complex cases, about lives he'd saved, about the relentless demands of his patients. I'd always been so proud of him, so proud of his dedication, his unwavering commitment to his calling. I'd celebrated his successes, admired his tireless work ethic, even encouraged it in a way. Had I, in my pride, overlooked his needs, the deeper, unspoken desires for connection and companionship that every human being craves? The thought was a relentless tormentor, a self-inflicted wound that bled fresh with every mournful glance, every whispered eulogy. His colleagues, bright, intelligent young doctors, approached me, their faces etched with sincere grief. They spoke of Michael's brilliance, his unwavering empathy, his relentless pursuit of excellence. He was truly one of a kind, Mrs. Thorne, one young woman, her eyes red-rimmed, said to me, her voice thick with emotion. He pushed us all to be better, to think deeper. He never stopped. Another, a man with a kind, gentle face, recalled how Michael had mentored him, staying late, explaining complex procedures, always patient, always encouraging. He lived for his patients, he added, his voice raspy. He was dedicated, absolutely dedicated. Their words were meant to comfort, and on the surface, they did, a fleeting balm to my raw grief. But beneath the veneer of their praise, my own internal pain intensified. Dedication. Yes, he was dedicated. But at what cost? Was it a choice, or a compulsion? Was he running from something, or running towards a loneliness I hadn't truly acknowledged? The doubts gnawed at me, relentless and unforgiving. Had I been too focused on my own life, on the intricacies of my investments, on maintaining the gilded cage of our existence? Had I mistaken his professional fulfillment for personal happiness? I had always assumed he was content, perhaps even too busy for the distractions of romance or family. He never complained, never voiced any deep-seated unhappiness. He'd always seemed so self-sufficient, so capable. But now, in the stark, brutal clarity of his absence, I saw the patterns, the subtle signs I had dismissed or ignored. The late nights, the canceled plans, the casual mentions of working weekends. I had rationalized it as the life of a busy, successful doctor. Now, it felt like a desperate attempt to fill the emptiness, a relentless pursuit that ultimately led to this. The coffin, draped in velvet, sat before me, a stark symbol of my failures, my blindness, my inability to truly see the son I loved more than life itself. The world outside the church windows was gray and weeping, mirroring the storm raging within my soul. I was adrift, drowning in a sea of what-ifs and if-onlys, each wave crashing over me, pulling me deeper into the abyss of my guilt. The chill of the late afternoon air was settling over the cemetery, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of my grief. Most of the mourners had dispersed, their black silhouettes fading into the winding paths, leaving me alone with the fresh mound of earth that marked Michael's final resting place. The scent of damp soil and wilting flowers hung heavy, a mournful perfume. I stood there, lost in the silent echo of my own despair, when a movement at the periphery of my vision snagged my attention. 3 figures, small and slender, were approaching Michael's grave. As they drew closer, a cold knot tightened in my stomach. They were girls, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, and what struck me immediately, with a jarring jolt that sent a tremor through my already fragile composure, was their uncanny resemblance. They were identical, 3 perfect mirror images, with long, dark hair, startlingly bright eyes, and an ethereal quality that made them seem almost otherworldly against the somber backdrop of the tombstones. They moved with a quiet grace, each holding a small, simple bouquet of white flowers, their steps barely disturbing the grass. My eyes, still blurred from unshed tears, focused on them with an intensity born of bewilderment. Who were they? Why were they here? As they reached the grave, they knelt in unison, their small hands carefully arranging the flowers at the base of the headstone, directly beside the elaborate arrangements that had been sent by hospitals and various medical associations. I watched, transfixed, my breath caught in my throat. This was a private moment, one that felt profoundly out of place, yet I couldn't tear my gaze away. Then, one of them, the one closest to me, her face pale and impossibly delicate, leaned forward slightly. Her voice, a mere whisper carried on the faint breeze, pierced through the silence of the cemetery, a sound so utterly unexpected, so profoundly jarring that it felt like a physical blow. "Goodbye, Daddy," she murmured, her voice laced with a child's innocent sorrow. The words slammed into me with the force of a tidal wave, ripping through the last vestiges of my fragile sanity. "Daddy?" My mind reeled, grasping for an explanation, any explanation, to make sense of what I had just heard, what I was seeing. Michael had no children. I knew this with absolute certainty. He was never married. He had never even mentioned a serious girlfriend in years, his life consumed by his work, by his patients, by the relentless demands of his profession. The very idea was preposterous, impossible. Yet, there they were, three identical girls, mourning my son, calling him Daddy. A cold sweat prickled on my skin, and a wave of dizziness washed over me. Was I hallucinating? Was the grief, the relentless, soul-crushing grief, finally breaking me? My neighbor, Mrs. Chun, a kind woman who had stayed with me through the entire service, stood a few feet away, meticulously adjusting a stray strand of hair beneath her black veil. I turned to her, my hand reaching out, trembling. "Mrs. Chun," I whispered, my voice hoarse, barely audible. "Do you see them? The girls?" She looked at me, her brow furrowed with concern, then followed my gaze to Michael's grave. She squinted, her eyes scanning the area where the girls had been moments before. "See who, Marlene?" she asked, her voice gentle, laced with an unmistakable note of worry. "There's no one there, dear. Just you and me." My heart plummeted into the icy depths of dread. They were gone, just like that, as if they had never been there at all. The space where they had knelt, the freshly placed flowers, remained, undeniable proof, yet to Mrs. Chun, they were invisible. A profound sense of terror, cold and absolute, began to seep into my bones. Had I imagined it? Had my mind, shattered by the weight of Michael's death, conjured up these ethereal children, these impossible daughters, as some cruel manifestation of my guilt, my regret over his childless life? The thought was terrifying, a betrayal by my own senses. But the image of them, so clear, so vivid, so heartbreakingly real, would not leave me. The way the light had caught their dark hair, the solemnity of their tiny faces, the quiet devotion with which they had placed those white flowers, it was seared into my memory, an indelible imprint. "Goodbye, Daddy." The whisper echoed in my ears, a chilling testament to an impossible reality. I stood there, rooted to the spot, torn between the rational certainty of my son's life and the inexplicable, haunting vision that had just unfolded before my eyes. My sanity felt like a fragile thread, stretched taut, threatening to snap at any moment. The cemetery, once a place of somber finality, had transformed into a place of unsettling mystery, a dark stage where the impossible had just danced briefly into my shattered world. The following days blurred into a restless, tormenting cycle of sleepless nights and anxious dawns. The image of the three girls, their identical faces etched with a sorrow that mirrored my own, refused to dissipate. Their whispered "Goodbye, Daddy" echoed in the silent chambers of my mind, a relentless question mark against the backdrop of Michael's childless life. Was it grief, finally, that had driven me to hallucinate? Or was there something real, something profoundly unsettling, hidden beneath the surface of my son's life that I, his mother, had been utterly oblivious to? The uncertainty was a cruel, unrelenting torture. I found myself drawn back to the cemetery, a strange, almost magnetic pull guiding my steps each morning. The grand, sprawling house felt like a cage, and the only place that offered any semblance of purpose was the tranquil, albeit mournful, expanse of the burial ground. I would arrive just as the first rays of sun began to filter through the ancient oak trees, casting long, dancing shadows across the rows of headstones. I walked the winding paths, my gaze sweeping over every corner, every hidden alcove, searching. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find. A clue, a confirmation, anything that would either validate my sanity or shatter my perception of Michael's life completely. The groundskeepers became accustomed to my solitary vigil, offering sympathetic nods, perhaps attributing my persistent presence to an unbearable grief. They didn't know the true nature of the storm raging within me. Each day was a fruitless endeavor, a slow, agonizing descent into deeper doubt. Yet, I couldn't stop. The need for answers was a gnawing hunger, eclipsing even the raw pain of losing Michael. A week passed, a succession of sunrises and sunsets marked by my solitary pilgrimages. My nerves were frayed, my eyes constantly scanning, my heart leaping at every rustle of leaves, every distant sound. Then, on the seventh morning, just as despair was beginning to truly settle its heavy cloak over me, I saw them again. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, sudden gasp. They were unmistakable. The same three girls, their dark hair neatly tied back, their figures slender and impossibly alike. This time, they were dressed in matching navy blue school uniforms, complete with white blouses and knee-high socks, a detail so mundane, so undeniably real, that it sent a jolt of ice and fire through my veins. They moved with the same quiet reverence as before, each carrying a fresh bouquet of simple white flowers. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of disbelief and a desperate surge of hope. This wasn't a hallucination. This couldn't be. They approached Michael's grave, their small faces solemn, their expressions mirroring the quiet grief I had witnessed a week prior. They knelt, arranging the flowers with practiced care, their small hands delicate against the cold stone. I remained hidden behind a large weeping willow, my body pressed against its rough bark, my eyes fixed on them, afraid that any movement, any sound, would shatter the fragile reality unfolding before me. And then, one of them, the middle one, her voice a soft, tremulous whisper, broke the silence. "We miss you, Daddy," she said, her voice filled with an aching sadness that was undeniably real, undeniably human. Another, her twin, chimed in, her voice equally soft. "Aunt Margaret says you're in heaven now." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow, yet this time, it wasn't the pain of confusion, but the chilling certainty of revelation. Aunt Margaret. The specific name, the casual, innocent familiarity of their words, eradicated any lingering doubt about my sanity. This was not a figment of my imagination. These girls were real. They were here, mourning Michael, calling him Daddy, referencing someone named Aunt Margaret. A cold, hard knot of fear and something akin to betrayal began to form in my chest. Who was Aunt Margaret? And more importantly, who were these children? My son, my seemingly transparent, dedicated son, had kept a monumental secret, a part of his life so profound, so utterly transformative, that it now stood before me in three small, identical forms. The world I thought I knew, the carefully constructed narrative of Michael's life, had just crumbled into dust, leaving behind a terrifying, bewildering void. The implications were staggering, the questions multiplying in my mind with dizzying speed. My grief, once a solitary burden, had suddenly, inexplicably, been joined by a startling, almost unbearable, mysteried legs, which felt suddenly weak and unreliable, moved independently of my will, propelling me out from behind the weeping willow and towards the three small figures. Each step was a leap into the unknown, a journey from the agonizing confusion of the past week into a reality I was utterly unprepared for. As I approached, their heads, previously bowed in silent communion with the grave, lifted in unison. Their eyes, wide and luminous, met mine, and in that instant, a gasp caught in my throat. There, staring back at me, was Michael. Not a ghost, not a trick of the light, but the unmistakable spark of his spirit, the familiar curve of his brow, the subtle tilt of his chin, the very essence of my son, reflected in three pairs of identical, innocent eyes. The resemblance was undeniable, a gut-wrenching confirmation that shattered any remaining vestiges of doubt. These were not apparitions. These were flesh and blood, a living testament to a truth Michael had kept hidden. The middle girl, the one who had spoken the word Daddy, took a hesitant step forward, her small hand clutching the wilting stems of her flowers. Her voice, though still soft, held a directness that belied her tender age. "Are you Daddy's mommy?" she asked, her gaze unwavering, searching my face with an almost unnerving clarity. The question, so simple yet so profound, was a gentle punch to my gut. It was the confirmation I desperately sought, delivered with an innocence that twisted my heart. I could only nod, my throat suddenly tight. The words caught somewhere between my chest and my lips. Yes, I finally managed to croak, the single syllable a fragile bridge between my old life and this bewildering new one. "Yes, I am." A shy, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, a glimmer of light in the sorrow etched on her face. "I'm Faith," she announced, her voice gaining a touch of childish pride. She gestured to the girl on her left, whose expression was a quiet blend of curiosity and sadness. "This is Hope." And then to the one on her right, whose eyes, wide and a touch more cautious, mirrored her sister's. "And this is Joy." Faith then looked directly at me, her gaze steady, her small voice ringing with a conviction that left no room for argument, no room for denial. "We are Daddy's daughters." The words, so casually spoken, landed with the weight of an anvil, crushing the last remnants of my carefully constructed world. My granddaughters, Michael's children. A wave of emotions, sharp and contradictory, washed over me. shock, a profound sense of betrayal that Michael had kept such a monumental secret, and beneath it all, a fragile, burgeoning warmth, a flicker of hope in the desolate landscape of my grief. I knelt, my knees protesting, bringing myself closer to their level, desperate to understand, yet afraid to overwhelm them. My voice was a whisper, raw with emotion. But how? I began, then stopped, realizing the question was too vast, too complex for these young minds. Faith, sensing my unspoken confusion, answered with a simple, childlike logic that cut straight to the heart of the matter. Daddy visited us regularly, she explained, her voice matter of fact. He came to our house almost every weekend. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile this image of Michael, the tireless doctor, with the Michael who was a present, loving father to 3 young girls. And then came the explanation, offered with a child's unfiltered honesty, that drove a fresh, agonizing spike into my heart. He didn't bring us to your house, Faith continued, her gaze dropping to the flowers in her hands. Because he said you still missed Grandpa Gerald very much. The explanation, delivered with such innocent bluntness, was a revelation and a condemnation all at once. Michael, my thoughtful, caring son, had kept his children from me, his mother, because he believed I was too consumed by the grief for my late husband, Gerald, their grandfather. He had shielded me, in his misguided kindness, from a joy I hadn't even known existed. The irony was a bitter twist in my gut. While I had been drowning in the loneliness of my widowhood, convinced Michael was equally solitary, he had been building a family, a secret life teeming with the very happiness I yearned for. He had protected me, or so he thought, from further sorrow, and in doing so, had robbed me of years with my own granddaughters. The realization was a profound, aching sorrow, mingling with a fragile, new kind of hope. These girls, Faith, Hope, and Joy, were not phantoms of my grief. They were real, and they were Michael's legacy, a living, breathing connection to the son I had lost, and a sudden, unexpected purpose in a life I thought had ended. The world, once barren and empty, had just been repopulated, not by ghosts, but by the tangible, undeniable presence of family. I knelt there in the damp grass, my hand reaching out instinctively, yearning to touch these newfound fragments of Michael, to pull them close, to anchor myself to this unexpected reality. But before I could complete the gesture, a sharp, urgent voice cut through the solemn quiet of the cemetery. Girls, Faith, Hope, Joy, what are you doing? Come here now. A woman, tall and slender, her face pale beneath a shock of dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, strode towards us, her eyes wide with a mixture of alarm and barely concealed panic. This had to be Aunt Margaret. Her gaze fell upon me, and her expression, initially one of stern command directed at the children, morphed into one of utter horror. Her eyes, dark and piercing, darted from my face to the girls, then back again, as if she were witnessing some impossible, terrifying apparition. "Oh my God," she breathed, the words barely audible, her voice thin with fright. She didn't wait for an explanation, didn't pause to assess the situation. Instead, she moved swiftly, almost frantically, towards the girls, her arms reaching out to gather them, to shield them from my presence. It was clear she intended to whisk them away, to make us disappear as quickly as they had appeared. "Come on, girls, we need to go right now," she urged them, her voice strained, her movements abrupt. Faith, Hope, and Joy, sensing the sudden tension, looked from their distraught aunt to me, their small faces mirroring a flicker of confusion and distress. A surge of protective instinct, a primal need to hold on to this fragile connection to Michael, welled up within me. I couldn't let them go, not now, not when I had just found them. "No, wait," I called out, my voice surprisingly strong, cutting through the hushed air. I pushed myself to my feet, my legs still shaky but determined. "Please, I need to talk to you. Who are you? Who are these girls?" Margaret's grip on the children tightened, her eyes still wide with apprehension, a cornered animal desperate to flee. "There's nothing to talk about," she said, her voice sharp, her gaze avoiding mine. "We have to leave." She began to pull the girls away, their small figures already starting to recede. "No," I insisted, my voice louder now, more insistent. "Not until you tell me what's going on. These are Michael's daughters. I saw them. They called him Daddy. And I saw Michael in their eyes." The last part, spoken with a raw conviction born of absolute certainty, seemed to give her pause. She hesitated, her shoulders slumping almost imperceptibly, as if the fight was draining from her. She looked at the girls, then back at me, a flicker of resignation replacing the panic in her eyes. The weight of my desperation, The undeniable truth of my words must have penetrated her fear. Finally, after a long, tense moment of silence broken only by the chirping of distant birds, she sighed, a deep, weary sound. "All right," she conceded, her voice flat, devoid of its earlier urgency. "Not here. This isn't the place." She cast a nervous glance around the desolate cemetery. "There's a diner a few blocks from here. The Blue Plate Special. Meet me there in an hour." With that, she tightened her hold on the girls and led them away, their three small figures disappearing quickly amidst the tombstones, leaving me once again alone, but this time, with a sliver of hope, a promise of answers. The hour felt like an eternity, each minute dragging, filled with a frantic rush of questions and a dizzying sense of anticipation. I arrived at the diner, a relic of a bygone era with its checkered floor and red vinyl booths, precisely on time. Margaret was already there, seated in a booth in the back, the three girls huddled beside her, their identical faces now solemn, their eyes fixed on me with a quiet, watchful curiosity. As I slid into the booth opposite them, ordering only a black coffee to steady my racing heart, Margaret began to speak, her voice low, almost a monotone, as if reciting a difficult, long-held secret. "Their mother, my sister, Sarah," she began, her gaze fixed on her clasped hands resting on the laminated tabletop. "She died 4 years ago. A sudden illness. It was unexpected." She paused, a shadow passing over her face, a fleeting glimpse of her own grief. Michael. Michael was their father." The words hung in the air, blunt and unequivocal, confirming the impossible truth. My son, my Michael, had been a father for at least 4 years. A profound, aching sorrow for the lost years, for the grandmother I could have been, washed over me. "Sarah, she and Michael had a long history," Margaret continued, her voice gaining a fraction of its strength. "They were together in college, on and off. It was complicated. When Sarah found out she was pregnant, Michael was just starting his residency. He was overwhelmed. She was overwhelmed. They decided it was best for him to focus on his career, and for her to raise the girls closer to family, away from the city." My mind reeled, trying to piece together this shattered narrative of Michael's life. College sweethearts. A secret family. The years of silence, of seemingly selfless dedication to his work, suddenly had a new, complex layer. Margaret went on, her gaze finally meeting mine, a hint of steel in her eyes. "Michael was always there for them, though. He visited them regularly, every weekend he could spare. He supported them financially, completely. He was a good father, Marlene, even if he couldn't be publicly." Her voice softened slightly, a hint of genuine affection for my son. "He loved those girls more than anything. He truly believed you couldn't handle another loss, another child to grieve, after Gerald." The weight of her words settled heavily upon me, a confirmation of Faith's innocent explanation. Michael's misguided attempt to protect me had inadvertently robbed me of years with my own granddaughters. The knowledge was a bitter pill to swallow, tinged with anger, but also with a strange, profound sense of gratitude. These three small, silent figures across the booth, my granddaughters, were real. They were here. And in their presence, in the echoes of Michael's secret love, a new, unforeseen chapter of my life had just begun. The emptiness of the house, the meaninglessness of the millions, suddenly felt a little less suffocating, now that I knew there were three small lives, three undeniable connections to my son, waiting to be embraced. The clatter of plates and the low hum of conversation in the diner faded into a distant buzz as Margaret's voice, now hesitant and laced with a profound reluctance, began to weave an even more startling thread into the already tangled tapestry of Michael's hidden life. She fiddled with the sugar packets on the table, her gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond my shoulder, as if preparing herself for an unwelcome confession. There's something else you need to know, Marlene," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, heavy with a burden she had clearly carried for too long. My heart, already a bruised and tender thing, braced itself for another revelation. I simply nodded, urging her to continue. The silence between us stretched taut with unspoken dread. "Sarah, my sister," Margaret continued, her voice gaining a fragile resolve. "She had a very rare genetic condition, a muscle disease. It's hereditary." The words, though spoken softly, landed with the force of a hammer blow. My mind, still reeling from the discovery of my granddaughters, struggled to process this new, terrifying piece of information. Hereditary. My eyes instinctively darted to the three girls, who sat quietly beside her, their small faces intent on our conversation, though perhaps not fully grasping the ominous implications of their aunt's words. A cold dread began to spread through my veins, a chilling premonition of what was to come. Margaret took a deep, shaky breath, her gaze finally meeting mine, and in her eyes, I saw not just sorrow, but a deep, abiding fear. Two of the girls, she revealed, her voice cracking slightly, Hope and Joy. They inherited it. The air left my lungs in a ragged gasp. Hope and Joy, my beautiful, innocent granddaughters. A wave of nausea washed over me, a sickening lurch in my stomach. The universe, it seemed, was determined to strip away every last vestige of comfort, to replace my simple, overwhelming grief with layers of agonizing complexity. A rare hereditary muscle disease. My mind, trained over a lifetime of financial complexities, immediately went to the practical, terrifying realities of such a diagnosis. Medical expenses, specialized care, a lifetime of struggle. It's incredibly expensive, Marlene, Margaret confessed, her voice barely audible. The treatments, the therapies, the specialists, it's a constant, never-ending battle. And it drains everything. She paused, then added, a note of profound gratitude entering her tone. Michael. He bore the brunt of it. All of it. He financed everything. Every single treatment, every visit, every piece of equipment. He never once hesitated. He never complained. He was their rock. A fresh wave of grief, sharper and more profound than any I had yet experienced, washed over me. Not just for Michael's death, but for the silent burden he had carried, for the immense responsibility he had shouldered, entirely alone. This brilliant, dedicated son of mine had been secretly battling this devastating illness alongside his hidden family, all while maintaining the facade of a carefree, work-obsessed bachelor. The image of him, tireless, self-sacrificing, dedicating his life not just to his patients, but to his own gravely ill daughters, brought tears stinging to my eyes. He kept it a secret, Margaret explained, her voice low, almost apologetic, because he didn't want to upset you. He said you were already so fragile after Gerald died. He didn't want to give you any more pain, any more worries. He truly believed he was protecting you. Her words echoed Faith's earlier, innocent explanation, but now, with the full weight of this shocking medical revelation, Michael's reasons took on a new, heart-wrenching dimension. He hadn't just been protecting me from the emotional burden of a secret family. He had been shielding me from the terrifying reality of a devastating disease afflicting his, and now my, own flesh and blood. The irony, the crushing, agonizing irony, was almost unbearable. While I grieved my son's childless life, lamenting the absence of grandchildren, he had been living a life of profound paternal responsibility, quietly battling a horrific illness, all to protect my supposed fragility. My perceived weakness, my inability to cope with additional sorrow, had, in his eyes, justified this monumental deception. The anger I felt, fleeting but sharp, towards Michael for his secretiveness, for his perceived judgment of my resilience, was quickly subsumed by a crushing wave of sorrow for the burden he had carried, and an overwhelming, fierce surge of love for the man he truly was, a selfless, dedicated father, even in secret. The emptiness of my house, the vastness of my fortune, now took on a terrifying new purpose, a chilling clarity. The millions, once meaningless, suddenly had a desperate, immediate reason for being. My granddaughters, two of them, were sick, and it was up to me, their grandmother, to pick up the mantle Michael had so bravely carried. That a strange cocktail of emotions churned within me, hot and bitter and unexpectedly, fiercely protective. There was a raw sting of anger at Michael, a sharp, visceral resentment that he, my own son, could have doubted me so profoundly, could have seen me as so fragile, so incapable of handling life's cruelties that he felt compelled to orchestrate such a monumental deception. He had presumed to know my limits, to shield me from a reality that was, in fact, a continuation of his own life, a living testament to his love. How dare he? How dare he think I would crumble under the weight of this truth, especially when that truth involved his own children, my own flesh and blood. The insult, in its own way, was as painful as the grief. Yet, beneath that flash of indignation, a deeper, more profound understanding began to settle. I looked at Faith, her small face solemn, then at Hope and Joy, their young eyes wide with a fragile innocence that was already battling an unseen enemy within their tiny bodies. Michael had loved them. He had loved them fiercely and completely, enough to shoulder an unimaginable burden alone. His intentions, however misguided, had sprung from a place of profound care, a desire to spare me further pain. The knowledge of his secret struggle, his unwavering dedication to his daughters, painted him in a new, even more heroic light. My anger, though still present, began to morph, softening into a complex blend of sorrow, pride, and an overwhelming surge of compassion for the man I had truly lost. My gaze then shifted to Margaret. Her face, in the harsh diner lighting, was a roadmap of exhaustion. The lines etched around her eyes, the subtle tremor in her hands as she gripped her coffee cup, the slight slump of her shoulders, they all spoke volumes of the silent, relentless struggle she had been enduring. She had been Michael's co-conspirator in this secret, but more importantly, she had been a constant, unwavering presence for these girls, a tireless guardian bearing a heavy weight. I saw the toll it had taken, the years of stress and worry, the endless medical appointments, the financial strain, all of it etched onto her weary frame. She looked like a woman teetering on the brink, and the raw vulnerability in her eyes pierced through me. And then, with startling clarity, it hit me. These three girls, these precious, innocent souls, were all that remained of Michael. They were his legacy, the living embodiment of his love, his sacrifice, his very essence. And by extension, they were my last remaining family, my only tether to the future, the sole recipients of the love and resources I had amassed, once meaningless, now imbued with a desperate, vital purpose. The vast, empty house, the quiet loneliness that had permeated my existence, suddenly seemed intolerable, a stark contrast to the vibrant, if challenging, lives that sat before me. A fierce, almost primal resolve solidified within me. The era of fragility was over. The time for hiding, for secrets, was past. I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to be steady, to project a strength I felt bubbling up from a newly discovered wellspring deep inside. Margaret, I began, her name feeling oddly unfamiliar on my tongue. This changes everything. I paused, gathering my thoughts, then pressed on, my gaze direct, unwavering. Michael thought he was protecting me. He thought I was too weak, too fragile, to handle this. He was wrong. My eyes flickered to the girls, then back to Margaret, a silent promise in my gaze. I may have lost my son, but I will not lose my granddaughters. Not like this. I leaned forward, my voice low but firm, cutting through the background noise of the diner. You look exhausted, Margaret. And I have resources. More than enough. Michael may have carried this burden alone, but he doesn't have to anymore. And neither do you. I extended my hand across the table, a silent plea, an offering of partnership. Let me help. Let me take on the financial aspects. Let me help with the organization, the appointments, finding the best specialists, anything. We'll do this together. The words flowed out, driven by an urgent need, a desperate desire to rectify Michael's misguided protection, to embrace the family I had unknowingly been denied. Margaret stared at my outstretched hand, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and, slowly, a glimmer of profound relief. She looked utterly overwhelmed, tears welling in her eyes, though she quickly blinked them back. Faith, who had been listening intently, her bright eyes darting between her aunt and me, suddenly leaned forward, her small hand reaching out to touch Margaret's arm. Please, Aunt Margaret, she whispered, her voice soft but clear, her gaze filled with an encouraging innocence. Grandma Marlene can help. Daddy would want us to be together. Her sisters, Hope and Joy, murmured in agreement, their small nods reinforcing Faith's plea. The children, sensing the turning tide, had inadvertently become my strongest advocates. Their innocent faith, their unquestioning acceptance, sealed my resolve. This wasn't just an offer of assistance. It was a reclaiming of family, a promise to fight for the lives Michael had so bravely and secretly protected. The meeting with the specialist, a man with kind but serious eyes and a quiet intensity, felt like a gauntlet. He spoke in measured tones, explaining the intricacies of the girl's condition, a rare hereditary muscular dystrophy that was, as he delicately put it, aggressive in its progression. He detailed the current limitations, the relentless decline, and then, a sliver of hope, he spoke of experimental treatment being conducted at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. It was cutting-edge, promising, but also intensely demanding, requiring a full month of intensive, daily therapy and monitoring. The weight of his words settled heavy in the air, transforming the theoretical illness into a tangible, terrifying enemy lurking within my granddaughters. My gaze flickered to Hope and Joy, their small faces pale, their expressions a mixture of confusion and quiet fear as the doctor used terms like muscle degeneration and quality of life. Faith, ever vigilant, instinctively reached for their hands, her small fingers intertwining with theirs, offering silent comfort. As the doctor concluded, detailing the rigorous schedule and the sheer commitment required, a singular, powerful thought solidified in my mind. banishing all lingering doubts and fears. This was it. This was the fight. The millions in my bank accounts, once a burden, now became a weapon. The empty rooms of my sprawling estate, once a testament to my loneliness, now seemed irrelevant. My son, in his quiet, selfless way, had fought this battle alone for years, and now it was my turn. There was no hesitation, no question of cost or inconvenience. These were Michael's daughters, my granddaughters, and if there was a chance, any chance at all, to give them a future, to ease their struggle, then I would seize it with every fiber of my being. I turned to Margaret, her face still etched with the weariness that had become so familiar. Her eyes, however, held a flicker of hope, tempered by a deep-seated apprehension. "We're going," I stated, my voice firm, leaving no room for argument or negotiation. "All of us. We'll move to Baltimore for a month. The girls will undergo this intensive treatment." The words were decisive, a declaration of war against the disease that threatened to steal their futures. Margaret's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and profound relief washing over her face. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to object, to voice concerns about the disruption, the logistics, the sheer scale of the undertaking. But I cut her off, my voice softening just slightly, a promise in my tone. "I'll handle everything. The accommodations, the travel, the logistics, every single medical bill. You just need to focus on the girls, on their well-being, on getting them through this." My gaze swept over Faith, hope, and joy, lingering on the two whose lives hung in such delicate balance. "We will make this work, Margaret. We will do everything humanly possible." Margaret hesitated for a long moment, her eyes searching mine, seeking reassurance, perhaps even a sign that this was not some impulsive, grief-stricken whim. She looked at the girls, then back at me, and I saw the immense weight of her years of struggle, the hope that had been so often deferred, reflected in her tired eyes. Then, slowly, a single, almost imperceptible nod. "All right, Marlene," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, raw with the acknowledgement of the colossal commitment I was offering. "All right." Faith, who had been silently observing the entire exchange, suddenly beamed, a ray of pure sunshine in the somber room. "We're going to Baltimore, Aunt Margaret," she exclaimed, her voice filled with childlike excitement, a clear indication that she understood the magnitude of the opportunity, even if she couldn't fully grasp the medical complexities. Her enthusiasm, so pure and unburdened, seemed to bolster Margaret, who managed a small, tired smile in return. I reached across the table, taking Margaret's hand in mine, squeezing it firmly. My gaze held hers, direct and resolute. "I promise you, Margaret," I vowed, the words infused with every ounce of my rekindled purpose, my revitalized love for this unexpected family. "I will never leave them. Not now. Not ever." The path ahead would be arduous, fraught with uncertainty, but for the first time since Michael's death, I felt a flicker of purpose, a reason to fight, a reason to live. The future, once a desolate wasteland, now held a fierce, determined light. 18 months. It felt like a lifetime, and yet a blink. The grand, echoing emptiness of my old house was a distant memory, replaced by the vibrant, often chaotic, life that now filled our new home in Baltimore. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the cheerful chaos of scattered toys, half-finished art projects, and the constant hum of activity. The silence that had once suffocated me was now a rare, almost unsettling phenomenon. My days, once a desolate stretch of grief and aimless wandering, were now meticulously structured around therapy sessions, school runs, doctor's appointments, and the joyful, exhausting demands of 3 energetic girls. The treatment, that initial leap of faith, had yielded results that felt nothing short of miraculous. Hope, whose condition had been particularly aggressive, had shown remarkable stabilization. The progression of the disease, once a terrifying downhill slide, had slowed, almost halted. She still had her challenges, yes, but her energy levels were higher, her strength maintained. And Joy, my sweet, determined Joy, her mobility had visibly improved. We celebrated every small victory, an unassisted step, a slightly longer walk, the confident grasp of a crayon. The rigorous daily therapies, the dedicated doctors, the relentless pursuit of every possible avenue of care had paid off in ways I could barely have dared to dream of. The house often smelled of antiseptic wipes and the faint, sweet scent of children's shampoo, a far cry from the stale grandeur of my former life. I found a purpose in this new existence, a profound and undeniable reason to rise each morning. Caring for my granddaughters wasn't a chore. It was a privilege, a healing balm to my shattered soul. Their laughter, their innocent questions, Their boundless energy filled the gaping void Michael's death had left. I discovered a strength within myself I hadn't known existed, a fierce, unwavering determination to provide them with every opportunity, every comfort, every ounce of love I possessed. My hands, once accustomed to the delicate balance of stock portfolios, now found immense satisfaction in braiding Faith's long hair, helping Hope with her exercises, and reading bedtime stories to Joy. Margaret, too, had found her footing in this new life. The weariness that had once defined her had begun to recede, replaced by a quiet strength and a renewed sense of direction. She was no longer simply a tireless guardian. She was a valued partner in this shared endeavor. She found meaningful employment at a patient advocacy office nearby, her personal experience giving her a profound empathy and understanding that few others possessed. She worked tirelessly, helping other families navigate the labyrinthine world of rare diseases, her dedication a testament to the journey she had undertaken. We were a team, a small, unconventional unit forged in the crucible of loss and revelation. Baltimore, with its vibrant neighborhoods, its world-class medical facilities, and its welcoming community, had become more than just a temporary treatment stop. It had become home. The thought of returning to the grand, empty house, to the life of isolated wealth, now felt utterly unappealing, almost alien. We had found something here, something infinitely more precious than any material possession. We had found a strong family, unexpected in its formation, yet undeniably profound in its connection. It had emerged from the depths of tragedy, from the shadows of secrets, and had bloomed into a haven of happiness and fulfillment. I often thought of Michael and the complex web of love and protection he had woven around these girls. He had been so wrong about my fragility, so mistaken in his assessment of my ability to endure pain and embrace new challenges. I hadn't shattered. Instead, I had found a strength I never knew I possessed, a resilience born from the fierce love for his daughters. But he had been right, so profoundly, beautifully right, about one thing. There was, indeed, so much love in these girls, an overflowing, boundless wellspring of affection and joy, that it truly changed everything. It had not just filled the emptiness, it had redefined my entire existence, giving it a depth and richness I had never imagined possible. It was a life I wouldn't trade for all the millions in the world.